Hello, fellow Shakespeareans. It's time for episode 12 of SONGspeare 2020. This is Henry VIII. Not Henry IV, not Henry IV Part 2, not Henry V, not Henry VI Part 1, nor Henry VI Part 2, not even Henry VI Part 3. It's Henry VIII. Henry VIII is another one-song wonder with a single song in Act 3 called Orpheus with his Lute. There's actually a lot of other music in the play, it's just that is the one song. Now, Henry VIII is one of those Shakespeare plays where authorship is largely in question, and actually, we're pretty sure that Shakespeare collaborated with other authors. Many people think John Fletcher was one of the playwrights who also wrote Henry VIII. He also is believed to have written the scene and the song that Orpheus with his lute appears in. That text, or a similar text to that, actually appeared in one of Fletcher's own plays. Did Shakespeare even write this? Probably not, or possibly not. Does it matter? No, because a bunch of composers have set it to music because it's all about how great music is lulling, and all of that stuff. So how could they resist? In fact, I had to narrow down about 20-some possibilities to figure out which pieces I wanted to do in this episode. Represented by the likes of Ray Vaughan Williams, who actually has two settings of Orpheus with his lute that are fairly well known, so I didn't choose to sing either of them, but I might at a later date because I think it would be an interesting comparison. There's also a setting by the Swedish composer Stenhammar, although I wanted to do it, I was not willing to learn how to speak Swedish to do it. I actually need to because there's a whole lot of really great Swedish music and I've been meaning to learn for a while. I just haven't done it yet. There's also a setting by Arthur Sullivan of Gilbert and Sullivan fame that's fairly well known. A lot of sopranos have recorded it. Speaking of things that aren't very obscure, Roger Quilter has also written a setting of Orpheus with his lute. As a rule, I don't sing Quilter because a lot of people sing Roger Quilter and are familiar with his Shakespeare songs. As far as historical precedents for this song, it's one of the ones we just don't know anything about. However, there is a possibility that it was sung to the same tune, or at least the words fit into the same tune as the one Shakespeare song we really do know was used, which is Thomas Morley. His setting of O Mistress Mine is one that we know was used in Shakespeare's time and in his theaters, and it turns out, or at least Ross Duffin in his book about Shakespeare music, points out that the lyrics might fit in. Thomas Morley's O Mistress Mine goes, "O Mistress Mine, where are you roaming?" And Ross Duffin interpolates the lyrics into Orpheus with his lute made trees, etc. So it does sort of fit in. Whether or not I'm really convinced at that, I will leave a link to the one on Ross Duffin's CD in the comments below. Now, with all of these settings to choose from, I had a little bit of a hard time narrowing down which ones I actually wanted to sing and which ones I wanted to feature in the episode. I actually sang one that I wound up not using. Originally, I was looking at 11, and then I thought 11's a lot. Maybe I'll narrow it down to 9, and then I was having trouble actually getting my life together and filming this episode, so I decided 6 wives, 6 pieces. So 1 piece per wife of Henry VIII. Sorry, ladies. It's the least I could do. Now, since we're going to spend another episode just meditating on one song, I thought I might read the song text. There might be slight variations in the text between the settings of each version, but in general, I try to sing what's on the page unless it seems like it's obviously a typo, or my brain just does it differently because I've sung it and read it the same way a bunch of different times. Orpheus with his lute appears in Act 3, Scene 1, when Queen Catherine is sort of lamenting her situation because Henry VIII is trying to divorce her and find a reason to nullify the legitimacy of their marriage. So the whole song is basically meant as a distraction from Catherine's sad ordeal. And the song goes like this. Orpheus with his lute made trees, and the mountain tops that freeze bow themselves when he did sing. To his music, plants and flowers ever sprung, as sun and showers there had made a lasting spring. Everything that heard him play, even the billows of the sea, hung their heads and then lay by. In sweet music is such art, killing care and grief of heart, fall asleep or hearing die. So the first setting of this song that's all about how great music is and how music is calming and it's lulling and it makes all cares go away is by Eric Coates. Eric Coates was an English composer and also professional violist who lived from 1886 to 1957. He studied at the Royal Academy of Music, and he kind of falls into a sentimental music category, or light music. He actually wrote quite a bit of music, and he was known for writing really good melodies and having a lot of rhythmic drive. So I'm not really sure where the light music thing comes from, but it does show up when you read about him. He wrote many songs, and most of them are in this highly sentimental style. Most of them are at sort of a moderate to slow tempo, and they just sound nice. In fact, the first three settings in this episode are all sort of what I would call sentimental music. Gather friends around the piano while Sally sings a nice song for us. It has that feeling of kind of early 20th century middle class life and how music fit into that world. That being said, there is still a little bit of drama. There are high points, there are low points. It's not just wallpaper music. I wouldn't sing it if it felt like that. So here is Eric Coates' sentimental but not too dry setting of Orpheus with his lute.
Orpheus with his lute, made trees and the mountain tops that freeze, bow themselves when he did sing, bow themselves when he did sing. To his music plants and flowers ever sprung, as the sun and showers there had made a lasting spring. Everything that heard him play, even the billows of the sea, hung their heads and then lay by, hung their heads and then lay by. In sweet music is such art, killing care and grief of heart. Fall asleep, or hearing die.
The second setting in our sentimental set comes from Charles Fonteyn Manney. He was an American composer who I honestly didn't know much about before, and I still don't know very much about now. He was born in Brooklyn, and his music falls into that same sort of early 20th century sentimental style. He lived from 1872 to 1951, and in addition to a lot of songs, he actually wrote two sacred cantatas, one for Christmas and one for Easter, and apparently he wrote a comic opera, which I don't think has ever been staged. So from the depths of obscurity, here is Charles Fonteyn Manney's setting of Orpheus with his lute.
Orpheus with his lute made trees and the mountain tops that freeze, bow themselves when he did sing, bow themselves when he did sing. To his music plants and flowers ever sprung the sun and showers that made a lasting spring, that made a lasting spring. hung their heads and then lay by. In sweet music is such art, killing care and grief of heart. Fall asleep or hearing die. Fall asleep or hearing die.
Rounding out our sentimental trilogy is Carl Busch. He was a Danish-born composer who lived most of his life in America. Maybe not most, but he spent a lot of his professional life in America and actually settled down in Kansas City, Missouri. Sort of an odd place for a Danish person to wind up, I guess. He lived from 1862 to 1943, so he lived through both world wars in the US. He traveled around the United States, he taught here, he composed here, he led orchestras here, so he actually had a very large impact on especially the music scene in Kansas City, but also just the American music scene, even though he was born somewhere else. Even though this piece still has that mostly sentimental style, it features a little bit more drama, a little bit more gut-wrenching harmonic surprises than the Manney or the Coates did. I'm also very happy to be joined by Cindy Lindeen-Martin on the piano for this one. She really has been pretty instrumental, no pun intended, to the SONGspeare 2020 project, so thank you so much, Cindy. This is Carl Busch's setting of Orpheus with his lute.
Orpheus with his lute made trees and the mountain tops that freeze bow themselves when he did sing. To his music plants and flowers ever sprung, the sun and showers that made a lasting spring. Everything that heard him play in the billows of the sea hung their heads and then lay by. Hung their heads and then in sweet music is such art, killing care and grief of heart. Fall asleep
Outside the realm of sentimental music, we now have a setting by Edmund Rubbra. He lived from 1901 to 1986, and he was a British composer that we heard from, I think, 2 episodes ago. He studied under Gustav Holst, and I believe he actually had Ray Vaughan Williams as a substitute teacher when Gustav Holst couldn't be there, which I think is just a funny thing. His music, because he was a member of the 20th Century Composer Gang, he was born in 1901, so you can think things advanced from there. It goes between really, really highly complex and really inventive 20th century dissonant, kind of abstract, to more open, more ethereal modality appears a lot, and it appears in this piece. That's one of the things I like about Rubbra. Sort of like Britten, but a little bit gentler on the harmonic side than Britten. Everything is sort of just what it needs to be. He looks at like what the idea of the song is, he looks at what the context is of the words, and how the music is going to illuminate those. And if it needs to be really dissonant and sort of all over the place crazy, then it will be. And if it doesn't really seem like it needs to be, it's not necessarily that way. So I appreciate that in those early 20th century voices where it's not just, look how dissonant we can be, tonality is dead. In this piece, there's sort of an opening motive that just churns its way through the whole thing. It does progress, but it feels very circular, and like the voice just floats over this opening motive and churns itself out to completion. Here is Edmund Rubra's Orpheus with his lute.
Orpheus with his lute made trees, and the mountain tops that freeze bow themselves when he did sing. To his music plants and flowers ever sprung, a sun and showers that made a lasting spring. Everything that heard him play in the billows of the sea hung their heads and then lay by. In sweet music is such art, killing can't grief forgot. Fall asleep,
Our fifth piece, which also features Cindy Lindeen-Martin on the piano, is Mario Castelnuovo-Tedesco's setting of Orpheus with his lute. We all have heard from Mario Castelnuovo-Tedesco before, if you've been watching my episodes, that is. He was an Italian composer who lived from 1895 to 1968. He's very well known as a composer for the guitar, really at the forefront of writing for guitar in the 20th century. I've talked a lot about how his music tends to be on the more adventurous 20th century side, really biting, strong sense of irony. He has a really strong sense of the text, so I think he picks up all of those nice tidbits that we love in Shakespeare, where it's double meanings and there's a lot of commentary on society within even the simplest idea. This piece is not so much like that. It's certainly not boring, and it has a lot of interest to it, but it isn't the most biting, satirical, ironic thing that I've seen from Mario Castelnuovo-Tedesco. As with the Ruber setting, the voice seems to just sort of float above the accompaniment. It's an obvious invocation of a lute, right? So there are these huge arpeggios that are just sort of slowly played out in the piano. They are allowed to ring, and the voice just sort of goes on top. One thing I haven't mentioned very much about Castelnuovo-Tedesco's music is how much descriptive language there is in his music. It's actually quite a bit of Italian, which has sent me to this puppy more than a few times, but even in a piano accompaniment, many comparisons to other instruments. So there are like a harp, like a flute, like a trombone, like trumpets. In this case, there's this little parallel fourths line that you'll hear high in the piano, and he means for them to be flutes. So I think with the rolled chords invoking this lute, and then there's these little flutes, I think of this piece as being very pastoral. It feels like you're just sort of out in the field, and there's all of these little musical tidbits drifting by, but it's not so much in a structure. So featuring Cindy Lindeen-Martin again on the piano/lute/flute, here is Castelnuovo-Tedesco's setting of Orpheus with his lute.
Orpheus with his lute made trees, and the mountain tops that freeze bow themselves when he did sing. To sweet music is such art, killing care and grief of heart. Fall asleep,
Our final piece is from a category of composer that we haven't actually heard any from or very much from. And it sort of comes down to how I select pieces or how I've built up my little library of Shakespeare songs. One category of composers who are out there are not necessarily even publishing, but who post their music on different forums, largely on imslp.org, which is a huge website that has public domain sheet music, not necessarily so old it's in the public domain, but also music that composers can just give it out if they want to. One such composer is Martin Grayson. He actually was a career chemist, so composition was just sort of a passion of his. He lived from 1953 until just recently in 2012. One of his large interests in music was lute music, so writing new music for the lute and also for lute and voice, and also editing older music for the lute from earlier times. The music for his setting of Orpheus with his lute exists in both lute tablature and also a guitar version. I chose to do the guitar version because I was able to get Sarah Perske, our favorite composer and guitarist, back to join me. This key is actually lower than the lute version, but I decided to just do this one and not change the key and dig deep and sing some low notes. So you'll get to hear that. This is baritone version of me, although I didn't change my hair. So there you have it. 6 wives, 6 settings of Orpheus with his lute, 7 plays about a king named Henry that were written by Shakespeare or other people, 8 Henrys. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Like, comment, and subscribe if you want to see future episodes. Tell me what you loved, tell me what you hated, tell me which piece you think goes with which wife of Henry VIII. Until next time, happy Shakespearing.